Hi, welcome to another edition of NGWA's podcast series, Industry Connected. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with an attorney with the Kegler Brown law firm in Columbus, Ohio. His name is Brendan Feheley. He's a director and chair with the law firm and specializes in labor and employment practices. Brendan's going to share some tips and ideas of how to best manage your PPP loan, in addition to your staff and ideas and best practices when the time comes to reopen your offices. Hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Brendan, thank you for joining us. I thought I'd just, I've got your information up on the screen. Thought I'd let you kind of introduce yourself, get a little bit of your background.
Sure. Thanks, Terry. Thanks for having me. I've been at Kegler Brown since 2005, so about 15 years now, practicing almost exclusively in labor and employment. I do a little bit of workers' comp. I have an undergrad degree in industrial and labor relations, so I'm one of the lucky folks that had a pretty good idea of what I wanted to do. And then left there and went into law school and started doing labor and employment.
Good. Well,
so,
good.
Most of what I'm doing now is working with folks on the PPP loans and how to deal with the coronavirus as it impacts their workplaces right now.
Well, good. And so let's focus on that, because I myself had questions about it, but I've had a number of members call in and speaking with some of our members and business owners. And one of the first questions, because everybody's been hearing it, you got, obviously everybody knows termination, but you got termination, layoff, and then this word furlough. So where do those three play into this whole new scenario, new world we're in?
Yeah, so I think furlough is its technical definition is a separation from employment for a set period of time or a reduction in somebody's hours. So you take somebody from 40 hours down to 32, typically that's a furlough. You furloughed them 8 hours of time. Now you don't ever want to do that with salaried exempt people, because if they work at all during a week, they're entitled to pay for the whole week. So with folks that are not hourly, you typically want to just reduce pay as opposed to necessarily furloughing them, because a furlough telling them don't work on Friday is not going to save you any money. Okay. So typically that's a furlough. It's either hey, we're stopped for 2 weeks, or you're going to go from 40 hours down to 32, down to 20, whatever that number is that you've decided.
Okay. So
then a layoff is.
Oh, go ahead. I didn't want to interrupt.
Oh, that's okay. A layoff is a separation where you intend to call somebody back, but you don't know when. So it's not a termination. You're not telling them we don't ever want to see you again. You're just saying we'd like to see you again, but we don't know exactly when. And a layoff is typically a reduction all the way down to 0 hours. So a person's not working at all, and you don't know when you're going to recall them, but they're still an employee in your system. You haven't deleted them from the system. It's essentially an employer-created leave for an indefinite period of time.
Okay. So looking at where we are now with the CARES Act, and if an employer has to contemplate furlough or layoff, what about benefits? Are you required under either plan to continue the benefits, or do you have options?
So you have options. The first one is that normally, in the normal circumstance, a layoff constitutes a event that would disqualify somebody from health insurance. Okay. But in response to this, all three of the major insurance providers have stepped in and said, no, for this time, we are not going to have a layoff qualify people to be removed from health insurance if the employer would like to keep them on. And so most states have stepped in and said, well, you don't have to pay your insurance premium for a couple of months. They've deferred that insurance payment. And at the same time, the insurance companies have said, we understand that folks are getting laid off. but we're not going to require you to remove them from the plan. So right now, you most likely have more options than you would normally have, and you should be talking with your broker about what your options are in terms of whether or not you want to remove these folks. Now, the problem if you keep them on, but you don't have them working, is collecting the employee side of the premium, right? Because you can't get it out of a paycheck because they're not getting a paycheck. So you've got to coordinate with the employees about how they're going to provide their portion of the premium if they're still going to pay that, or whether you're going to front it for them for a period of time and then pick it back up off paychecks when they come back to work.
Okay, good. So now we're into this Paycheck Protection Program, and phase 2 coming out here shortly. A lot of the, I guess, rumors or I guess opinions that the money's going to go quick. It's almost already spoken for. So we have employers who may have already received their money under the first go around. We've got some waiting, hopefully, to get it in the second go around. There might be some who get locked out again. So what are your thoughts and ideas? And that was the best way for employers to approach this if they're going to get the Paycheck Protection loan money or not, and how do they best manage that with their staff?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a chess game is what it is. And you have 3 basic things that you're dealing with here. It's all under 2 broad concepts, which are just revenue and expenses, right? Yeah. You've got sources of revenue, and then you've got expenses. Your sources of revenue right now, there are 2. There's your normal source of revenue, whatever money you have in the bank, whatever money comes in from your clients that pay you, and then you have the CARES money. And if you get it, it has some limitations to it. It's 2.5 times your payroll amount.
Okay.
So your monthly payroll multiplied by 2.5, that's the max loan you can get. And then if you have your payroll be the same during the 8-week period of time after you get the money. So as soon as you get the money for the next 8 weeks, if your payroll, both cost and amount of full-time employees that you have, matches up with your payroll as of February, there's a period of time that you look at previously. And if those 2 match up, you get 100% of your money forgiven.
Okay.
Now, for most employers, they're not going to match up using that method, because there's a whole bunch of folks that have been laid off. And the question is, how do we get them back to work if we don't have enough work to justify bringing them back?
Right.
The CARES Act thought about that, and what they did was give you a catch-all, a sort of a catch-all period. And that is, as long as everyone's brought back by June 30th, okay, right, then any money you spent on payroll can be forgiven. But as with everything, there's a catch. And the catch is, if you go the first method and you just bring everybody back and you keep them for the 8-week period of time, and let's say you bring back 96% of your employees,
yeah,
then 96% of your loan is forgiven. If you use the alternative method, which is the June 30th catch-up, then if you don't get everybody back, it's an all or nothing proposition. So nothing is forgiven. So I don't think, although the guidance hasn't been finalized yet, but I don't think you have to choose your method that you use until the end.
Okay.
What that then means is employers are stuck in a really tough spot, because you're trying to do what you can under method A to make sure you at least get some amount forgiven if you have to use that method.
Right.
If you're also trying to position yourself, the best case scenario is you can bring everybody back June 30th and then you can get it all forgiven. While still understanding that, hey, I don't have enough work to bring everybody back right now because my clients are shut down, jobs are closed, all of that. Then you throw into the top of all of this the fact that under the CARES Act, any person who's eligible for unemployment at all from the state gets $600 extra a week from the federal government.
Right.
And those checks are going to start coming. In Ohio, they expect the check to start coming here next week. So right as you're trying to tell people, hey, we'd like to bring you back to work, they're saying, wait a second, I just got a really big check from unemployment. I'm not sure I want to come back to work.
Right.
So all the employers are trying to manage all of these things. And I think there's a couple concepts that are worth going over just so people can understand what their options are.
Sure.
One is called partial unemployment. Okay. And what that means is, as long as an employee works less than 50% of their hours, they will be eligible for some amount of unemployment unless they make around in Ohio $55,000 a year with the federal supplement kicked in.
Okay.
And that's because the threshold for Ohio is $480 a week if you're a single individual with no dependents, and then it goes up to $650. As long as your wages as an employer are less than $480, then they're going to get a little bit of money from unemployment from the state of Ohio. Let's say they get $20 of unemployment from the state of Ohio. So you pay the employee $460, they get $20 from the state of Ohio. They're also going to get the extra.
Yeah, so the extra $20 brings them up to the 480, which is the threshold.
Yep.
Okay.
Then they're going to get the $600 from the federal government. So they're going to take home $1,080 for that 2-week period of time.
Versus what they would have had in your math there, $960. And now they've actually increased.
Yep.
Okay.
By $120. You got it. Then the good thing about that partial unemployment for you is they still count as some part of an employee for this CARES Act calculation that you've got to make. So you now get credit for at least a half of a full-time employee for that period of time for the CARES Act. So you're able to offset both that money you pay them,
right,
and use at least half of that FTE count so you can get some forgiveness on the back end of that loan, even if everyone doesn't come back on June 30th.
Gotcha.
So, and one other thing, because Congress didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about this before they jammed the CARES Act through, they didn't put together that the extra unemployment benefit doesn't run out until July 30th. So you have to get everybody back by June, and they're going to get extra unemployment through the end of July. So you've got a little bit of a problem there with people saying, wait a second, in the example we just went through, I want that extra $120 for the 4 weeks that I can get it between June and July. And you're saying, no, I want you back here by June 30th.
Right. So the dilemma that employers are going to face is, one option, they could reduce someone's hours down to less than 50%. So depending on the state they're in, their unemployment kicks in. The employer reduces their payroll on that particular individual by 50%. But then that individual gets that extra $600. So for the individual, they come out ahead being partially unemployed. Then the employer has to somehow entice that person to come back to work in order to fulfill the Paycheck Protection Program forgiveness part. And even when that time passes, you've still got a whole nother month left. Maybe the economy's kicking in. You need employees back on to pick up your workload, but they're not coming back because they're making more being unemployed.
That's exactly right. So how do you do it? There's one thing that we've come up with that we think might work, and that is that Congress did not require that the Paycheck Protection Act funds be spread out equally among the 8-week period of time.
Okay.
So you are allowed, as long as you spend it during the 8 weeks, you can spend it however you want. So one idea might be, we're going to bring everybody back on, we're going to take you from partial unemployment to from partial employment to full employment on June 1st. So you're going to be partially employed, as we just went through, from maybe May 1st through June 1st. And June 1st, we're going to bring you back full employment. What we're going to do is offer you a return bonus of the half of the money we didn't pay you in May, which is going to give you a benefit for the month of June, which might be enough to entice you to come back to work.
Gotcha.
So that we can get our number up by June 30th.
Okay. Good. Any other ideas, or you think that's the best one you guys have? That's an interesting take and position on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the nice thing is that as you get closer to July 31st, you're going to see more and more employees understand that, hey, I got to get back to work, or else there won't be a job for me on the other end,
Right.
and I'm not going to get this extra unemployment. So the closer you get to that June area where you can cover some of that pay for them, I think that's really something that can work. Now, the other thing that you can do is, if you have an aging workforce, you're allowed to use PPP funds for a voluntary early retirement program that you might do. Now, I would recommend that if you do that, you don't have the retirement date, the effective date of the retirement be until after June 30th, because you want to count them for headcount purposes for the PPP. But you can incentivize them by giving them a little extra money that doesn't really count for you, doesn't come directly out of your pocket, to try and have folks slide out into retirement if that's an avenue, if those are a situation you have in your workforce. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is, if you don't get it all forgiven, the loan terms are pretty good. Okay. It's for most people, it's a 1% interest rate. It's deferred for 6 months, and it's paid back over a 2-year period of time. So let's say you took out a loan for $200,000 and you got 50% of it forgiven. You've got a $100,000 loan. You don't start making payments on it until January, and you got a 1% interest rate. For most people, that's a better rate than your line of credit is.
Right.
And so in theory, you may just use it as a loan, think about it as a loan, but you ought to be calculating in how much you're going to get forgiven and how you're going to play that math out, to try and make things work. The other option you have is, if you have part-time employees, they only count for a partial FTE, but the CARES Act doesn't care who the employee is. So you can bump them up from part-time to full-time if they're willing to come back, and count that and get that extra credit for the full FTE.
Okay.
If they're willing to come back.
Good. So let me sort of switch gears a little bit, just in the interest of time. So we've got the Paycheck Protection Program, then also Disaster Loan Assistance Program.
Yeah.
What's the difference, and how can you work those two together, or are they two completely separate programs when it comes to managing your employee costs, staff, and?
So I think you can do both. You can get the disaster relief loan and the payroll protection act, I think. But the big difference is the disaster loan does not have any forgiveness. It's just a traditional SBA loan that you would get. And so you're still going to have to repay all of that money. Now, the other thing about it is that it doesn't have as limited a uses as the Payroll Protection Act loan. The Payroll Protection Act loan can only be used for payroll, rent, utilities, things of that nature. The disaster relief loan, I think you're free to use however you want, but you've got to repay all of it.
Okay, good. Well, as we wrap up here, is there anything that we haven't covered that you think our members, business owners, should be aware of when it comes to looking at, depending on states when they go to reopen, managing this PPP loan?
So I think reopening is going to be a tall challenge for everyone to do. The immediate things I would be thinking about are two. One, do I need a set of what I would call COVID-19 policies? And these are changes to what we normally do to deal with COVID-19. For example, are we going to take everybody's temperature when they come in the morning? Mm-hmm. If so, how many employee entrances do we have? Do we have to close some of them down because we need people to come in a certain place where they can get the temperature taken? The other big thing to deal with. And there's a lot of them depending on your workplace about how you're going to deal with it. But the big thing is, what do I do when I try to bring somebody back and they don't want to come? Either because they're scared or because they live with somebody that is an older person or immunocompromised or whatever. I think the only piece of advice I can give on that is the EEOC says, unless someone is disabled, you don't have to consider telework as an option for them. However, before you think that's good news, understand that the EEOC has written the laws on disability in such a way that I believe there are only 4 people in the Western Hemisphere who are not disabled, and they're superheroes. Okay. So everybody has some sort of disability. And so what I would expect is when they call and say, I can't come back because I have this, the best advice for the employer is I would say, go get a doctor's note indicating that you can't come back and indicating what the condition is, and then we'll deal with it. Okay. And if you've allowed that person to telework for the last month, it's going to be really hard to tell them they can't telework now.
Right.
But if you haven't allowed them to telework before, you just shut your office down and now you're reopening it. You might say, well, that's not a reasonable accommodation and you could part ways with them. But I'd be careful about that, and I'd be certain that you're talking to somebody and managing through that process. But the big thing on reopening is just making sure that you've got your policies right and you've got your facility right. You know, make sure that the lunchroom isn't open if that's where everybody congregates, because you don't want people congregating. Make sure that, you know, you've walked through what it's going to look like to work in this new environment we're living in.
Okay, good. So if the last question for you, then if they do get the note and they can work from home, is that indefinite period? How long, or is that still to be known depending on how this whole coronavirus plays out?
Yeah, it's not indefinite, and I would certainly make sure that when you're talking with them, you're saying this is for a set period of time, right? Because or for a period of time until such time as the employer, you know, stops it, because the situation is better from a health perspective that you can come into work here, and that's probably going to be an individual thing depending on each person. Some people, if we can get a treatment for this that minimizes their likelihood of having complications from it, then they'll be able to come back quicker than somebody else who maybe has very severe asthma, for whom this is a bigger risk, and they may need to stay out longer. It's a case-by-case scenario, but I think you want to make sure that when you're communicating with the employee, this is not a forever thing. I think we're working through all of it sort of as it comes. And then the other big thing to think about is on an accommodation question, if there are more than one acceptable accommodation, the employer gets to choose which one they want. So just because the employee would like to work from home, if there's anything else that you can do that eliminates their risk or reduces their risk to an acceptable amount, then you're allowed to pick between those options. So don't just because they come in and say, I want to telework, agree to it. Think about whether or not there's anything else you could do.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. Well, hey, I appreciate your time today. And is there any final thoughts, comments?
No, just good luck to everybody. And it's going to be different in every state. So, you know, hold on tight, and let's hope we can get back to normal here soon.
Good. Well, thanks, Brendan. This has been extremely helpful and insightful, and I appreciate your time today.
Yep. Thanks, Terry.
Great. Stay safe. Stay healthy.
You too.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye.